During my first summer in a desert suburb of Phoenix, Arizona, the daytime highs, often exceeding 40 degrees Celsius, taught me a quick lesson. Everyone kept their doors and windows shut tight, hiding in air-conditioned rooms, and hardly a soul was to be seen on the streets. I lived there for nearly a month without even clearly seeing what my next-door neighbor looked like. The neighborhood felt unnervingly quiet. That changed the moment I was added to the community's neighborhood watch group chat. It was like kicking open a door to a bustling world hidden beneath that calm surface, revealing the outrageous yet endearing lengths ordinary Americans would go to for neighborhood safety. They had effectively transformed what should have been a serious security organization into the community's liveliest hub for daily gossip and mutual aid. It all started simply enough. Shortly after I moved in, I found a flyer in my mailbox introducing the Neighborhood Watch. It invited residents to join a patrol team to help prevent home burglaries and included a QR code for the group chat. Thinking that the summer nights were cool enough for an occasional stroll, and that I might as well patrol while I was at it, I scanned the code and joined, completely unaware of just how intensely competitive and over-the-top this group actually was. I was dumbfounded on my very first day. The group announcement listed over 20 dense patrol rules, more detailed than a corporate employee handbook. Patrol members were required to wear matching reflective vests and carry high-powered flashlights and two-way radios. Shifts were scheduled down to the hour, with pairs patrolling from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. and circling the neighborhood 3 times. We had to record the license plate numbers of any unfamiliar vehicles and approach anyone parked for more than 10 minutes to question them. Anyone loitering in the neighborhood after 10 p.m. was automatically reported as a suspicious person. They even specified exact walking routes and the specific scripts to use when reporting incidents. It was all as rigorous as a professional security team. The group admin was Old Man Greg, a retired police officer living in the middle of the neighborhood. With his graying hair and posture that remained ramrod straight, he spoke with a professional gravity, constantly reminding the group that no safety issue is too small and insisting that, while our community was generally safe, we could never afford to let our guard down. At first, I assumed the old man was just restless in retirement and looking for something to do to pass the time. But after joining my first patrol, I realized he wasn't the only one taking it seriously. I was paired with Teresa, a stay-at-home mom who lived diagonally across the street. She appeared gentle and soft-spoken, yet she was even more meticulous than Greg when on patrol. Her eyes scanned every yard and every car parked along the street. She took careful note of details like a garage door left slightly ajar or a window left cracked open, jotting them down in a small notebook and specifically tagging the homeowners in the group chat afterward to remind them. What amused me most was the contents of her bag. Besides a flashlight and a walkie-talkie, she carried pepper spray, a small first aid kit, and even a small bag of cat food, explaining that she often encountered strays while patrolling and liked to feed them. She managed to add a touch of heartwarming contrast to what was otherwise a serious safety patrol. Over the next 2 weeks, I got a real taste of the group's quirky daily routine. The community chat buzzed with messages from morning till night, mostly consisting of reports on suspicious activity, though 9.5 times out of 10, it turned out to be a false alarm. Someone once snapped a photo of a strange pickup truck parked on the street, noting that it had been there for nearly 20 minutes without the driver getting out, which looked suspicious. After a tense discussion about whether to call the police or go investigate, the driver finally stepped out carrying a toolbox and headed to a neighbor's house. It turned out to be a plumber the homeowner had hired. He had notified the property management office, but simply hadn't mentioned it in the group chat. There was even a time someone messaged past 11 p.m. reporting movement in their backyard. A shadowy figure seemed to be lurking. terrifying the whole family so much that they didn't dare turn on the lights and instead crouched behind the curtains, watching for half an hour. The neighborhood patrol team rushed over and circled the house, only to discover it was the neighbor's husky. The dog had jumped the fence and was digging up a cactus in the yard, getting covered in dirt in the process, before squatting in the corner to chew on grass roots. The funniest incident happened one weekend when Old Man Greg was on patrol himself. He spotted a man in a hat walking through the neighborhood with his head down, occasionally looking up to check house numbers, acting quite furtively. Greg immediately radioed 3 nearby patrol members, and the 4 of them slowly closed in, forming a perimeter. When they got close, however, they realized it was a colleague of mine who had just moved in. He had come to pick up some documents he'd left at the office. Since the houses in the neighborhood all looked alike, he was trying to locate my place by checking the house numbers. My colleague stood there, watching 4 men in reflective vests and flashlights around him, his face turning pale with fright. He later complained to me, "Your neighborhood security is intense. It's like something out of a cop movie." While I apologized, I also found the situation absurd and couldn't help but wonder if everyone was being a bit too high-strung. What was meant to be a friendly neighborhood watch had turned into a state of paranoia. It felt like overkill. This feeling peaked after I was once interrogated as a suspicious person myself. I had worked late and didn't get home until after 10 p.m. Wanting to stretch my legs in the warm night air, I took a walk around the neighborhood without my phone or a reflective vest. I had barely walked half a block when 2 new patrol members stopped me. They subjected me to a serious interrogation, asking where I lived, what my name was, and why I was out so late, and only let me go after I produced my driver's license to show my address and called Old Man Greg to confirm my identity. I was really annoyed at the time, feeling that the organization was overstepping its bounds. Getting checked just for taking a walk in my own neighborhood felt completely backward. For the next few days, I stopped joining the patrols and couldn't be bothered to check the group messages. I just thought these people had too much time on their hands and were making a fuss over nothing. But just as I was losing all patience with the group, an incident completely changed my perspective. It was a sweltering weekend night, past 10 o'clock, and I had just showered and was getting ready for bed when my phone started vibrating wildly. I picked it up to find the neighborhood watch group in a frenzy. The granddaughter of Mrs. Miller, who lived in the last row of houses, had posted a message. Her grandmother had gone out for a walk around 6 that evening and still hadn't returned, leaving her phone at home. The elderly woman had a heart condition. While the desert nights were cooler, heat stroke was still a risk, and the surrounding area was full of undeveloped land. Taking a wrong turn could be extremely dangerous. I initially thought people would just keep an eye out from the comfort of their homes, but less than 5 minutes after the message went out, Old Man Greg sent a voice note. His voice was as steady as ever, yet tinged with urgency. "Attention, everyone. Gather at the community center plaza immediately. We'll split up to search. Bring flashlights and water. I'll bring the first aid kit." I quickly changed and ran to the plaza, only to find nearly half the neighborhood there. It wasn't just the regular patrol members. There were plenty of neighbors who had previously complained in the group chat about the strict rules and had never joined a patrol before. Some clutched flashlights, others carried bottles of water, and some even brought their dogs, saying their keen sense of smell could help with the search. Old Man Greg rapidly assigned search zones, dividing the dozen or so people into 5 groups to scour the surrounding wasteland, trails, and a nearby park. Teresa even handed out wet wipes and cooling patches to everyone, saying that if they found the elderly woman, they could help cool her down right away. I followed a group toward the wasteland behind the neighborhood. The night desert breeze felt a bit chilly, and the surroundings were pitch black, save for the bobbing beams of flashlights. Every now and then someone would call out Mrs. Miller's name, their voices carrying far across the open terrain. To be honest, I felt a sudden warmth in my heart at that moment. I had previously thought people were making a fuss over nothing or being overly meddlesome, but when someone actually needed help, no one held back. Everyone stepped up without hesitation or a single complaint. We searched for nearly an hour, and just as anxiety began to set in, a message came over the walkie-talkie from another group. They had found the elderly woman near a cactus by the southern trail. She was suffering from mild heat stroke and couldn't walk any further, so she had sat down to rest. Fortunately, she was otherwise unharmed. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief and hurried over. When we arrived, we saw Mrs. Miller sitting on a rock, holding a bottle of water. Teresa was kneeling beside her, applying a cooling patch to her forehead, while old Mr. Gregg stood nearby, calling the woman's granddaughter to let her know she was safe. The woman explained that she had taken a wrong turn and wandered further and further off track. Feeling dizzy, she had sat down to rest. She had been worried about spending the night out there alone and was overwhelmed to find so many people searching for her. Her eyes welled up with tears as she repeatedly thanked everyone. We walked her home that night and didn't head back to our own places until we were certain she was fine. It was nearly 1 in the morning, yet no one felt tired. Instead, the group chat was filled with messages saying how glad we were she was safe and agreeing that we should keep a closer eye on the elderly living alone in the future. Since then, I've never again thought of the neighborhood watch as people making a fuss over nothing. The group itself has quietly evolved. Old Man Gregg remains as serious as ever, yet he no longer fixates on rigid rules. The requirement to report leaving the house after 10 p.m. is gone, and there's no longer a mandate to interrogate every stranger we see. The patrol team still makes its rounds every night, but beyond just checking for safety, they take on other tasks. If an elderly neighbor needs medicine, a quick message in the group chat ensures a patrolling neighbor picks it up on their way. If a package arrives while no one is home, the patrol team moves it to the doorstep to keep it out of the scorching sun. If a child gets out of school early with no one to pick them up, a shout-out in the chat brings a parent heading that way to help out. Of course, mix-ups still happen now and then. Occasionally, someone mistakes a door-to-door salesperson for a suspicious character or takes a delivery driver at the wrong house for a scout casing the joint. These moments always spark good-natured teasing in the chat, but no one gets uptight or paranoid like they used to. Now, after dinner, I often join the patrol for a couple of laps around the neighborhood, feeling the cool desert breeze. Chatting with neighbors and seeing the lights glowing in every home gives me a profound sense of peace and security. Sometimes I find it amusing. I originally just scanned a QR code on a whim, wanting to join the safety group for the novelty of it. Instead, I stumbled into witnessing the earnestness and kindness of ordinary people and experienced so many absurd yet endearing mix-ups. In the end, I gained a circle of reliable neighbors and a deep sense of safety. That is perhaps the most interesting aspect of everyday life for ordinary Americans. People seem to guard their boundaries and value their privacy, rarely even visiting each other's homes. Yet deep down, they care about those around them. They might get worked up over trivial matters and create all sorts of funny situations, but when someone truly needs help, everyone steps up without hesitation. That seemingly absurd anxiety and earnestness is, at its core, the simplest form of kindness, turning a quiet, ordinary desert community into a place that feels lively and heartwarming. This is a true story set in a small town on the outskirts of Nevada. The protagonist, Mike, was an ordinary office worker in his 40s who managed inventory for a warehouse-style retail chain. His life ran with clockwork precision. He woke up at 6:30 a.m., left the house at 7 o'clock, and, without fail, bought a large black coffee, no sugar, no milk, from the same drive-thru at 7:20 before driving the same route to work. His life had been a straight, uneventful line until he stumbled upon something bizarre that completely altered his perception of what constituted a normal neighbor. One night, he returned from working overtime half an hour later than usual, around 11 p.m. As he parked in front of his home, he noticed lights on in the house across the street, a property that had long stood vacant. It wasn't the glow of an ordinary living room lamp, but a flickering blue-purple light reminiscent of stage lighting. Initially, he suspected an electrical issue, but when the same thing happened the following night, he decided to sit in his car and watch on the third night. He witnessed a man in a suit, carrying a briefcase, walk into the empty house at exactly midnight. Even stranger, the man unlocked the door with a key, despite the fact that real estate listings described the property as listed for sale but unoccupied. Suspecting an illegal occupation, Mike contacted the real estate agent, only to learn that the agent held the only key. He had dealings with the homeowner, but the owner had moved to Florida 3 years ago. The house had sat vacant ever since, making it impossible for anyone to be coming and going every night, a thought that already gave Mike the creeps. But the truly bizarre part happened a week later. He got off work early and arrived home around 5 p.m. to find a barbecue party taking place in the house's front yard. A dozen or so people in formal attire were chatting while holding glasses of red wine. The tables were laden with barbecue food and a projection screen, and someone was even giving a PowerPoint presentation. The screen displayed the title, 2026 Quarterly Community Sentiment Optimization Plan. Mike thought he had stumbled onto the wrong scene, but he confirmed it was indeed the vacant house across the street. Summoning his courage, he walked over and asked, "Who are you people?" In unison, as if a pause button had been pressed, everyone turned to look at him. A middle-aged woman smiled and asked, "Are you the residents' representative for this street? We're conducting an informal community test." Mike was even more bewildered. He pointed out that the house was supposed to be unoccupied. The woman replied, "The house is empty, but the usage rights belong to the Urban Behavioral Observation Project." She handed him a business card bearing the name of an organization he had never heard of, stamped with an official-looking government seal. Thinking it might be a prank, Mike went to City Hall the next day to check. A staff member confirmed that the house was indeed registered under an Urban Research Cooperation Initiative, though its specific purpose was classified. He was told only that the situation was legitimate, with no further details provided. Mike was thoroughly bewildered. However, what truly pushed him to the brink was the series of minor interventions in his life over the following days. For instance, the coffee shop where he was a regular began preparing his order before he even placed it, with the cup bearing the inscription, "Mike, Standard Concentration Calibration Complete." His office computer even triggered a pop-up notification reading, "Mood Index Advisory, Maintain Stability. Interaction with the house across the street is not recommended." Suspecting surveillance, he installed a security camera at his front door, only to find the feed replaced the next day by a test mode prompt featuring a person who politely urged him, "Please do not overanalyze." Mike's sanity began to unravel. Yet a week later, the situation took an even more bizarre turn. Unable to hold back any longer, he knocked on the door of the house across the street again. This time, a young man in a casual hoodie answered, looking nothing like the suited figures he had seen before, and said, "You're finally here. We've been waiting for you." Mike stood stunned as the man explained that the house was actually a behavioral experiment site designed to test how ordinary people reacted to mildly anomalous reality, phenomena such as unusual lighting, misplaced individuals, misleading information, and environmental tweaks, and that Mike had been selected as the stab. To put it simply, he was a designated subject of observation. They wanted to see if someone who lived an extremely regimented life would crack or resort to extreme behavior when faced with minor, inexplicable incidents. Mike found the whole thing absurd. He asked, "So, the coffee shop and the pop-up windows at work, was that you're doing too?" The other person nodded, explaining that these were merely minimal-level interventions designed not to influence real-life decisions. Mike was furious and considered calling the police, but the other person added, "If you choose to call the police now, we'll record a drop in your trust in the system and terminate the observation," speaking as calmly as if discussing the weather. Mike fell silent for a long time before finally asking, "And what if I don't cooperate?" The other person smiled and said, "Then you'll simply be replaced by another subject." That remark made Mike realize something far more terrifying. Perhaps the experiment wasn't centered on the house, but on the person. In the end, he neither called the police nor pursued the matter further. He simply returned to his old routine, buying coffee, going to work, and coming home as usual. Yet, occasionally, when passing that house at night, he would see the lights shifting and a figure behind the curtains seemingly taking notes. He never approached the house again, however, for he had begun to understand that in this seemingly ordinary American town, the truly abnormal element might never have been the house itself, but rather a form of normality that had been precisely engineered. At 2:30 a.m., my friend Jack got a call from a neighbor saying a stranger had been loitering outside his front door. Terrified, Jack immediately checked his security camera feed on his phone. Sure enough, a figure was pacing back and forth, occasionally pressing against the door to peer through the crack. He called the police right away and hid in his bedroom, too scared to even turn on a light. 20 minutes later, 2 police cars screeched to a halt, and 4 officers with flashlights surrounded the house. Jack peeked out through the curtains, his heart pounding. After searching the area for a while, the police finally woke up a disheveled man in a gray hoodie who had been asleep right there. The man stood up looking completely bewildered. Seeing the police surrounding him, he was even more shocked than they were. It turned out he wasn't a burglar at all, but a new tenant from the next street over. He had gotten drunk that night and mistaken Jack's house for his own. After fruitlessly trying to open the door with his key, he had simply sat down and fallen asleep on the doorstep. By the next day, the incident had become the talk of the neighborhood, and people even gave him a nickname, the guy who slept on someone else's doorstep. Just when we thought that was the peak of the absurdity, the real climax happened a week later. To apologize, the drunken new neighbor bought a box of donuts and went door to door handing them out. When he arrived at Jack's house, Jack was at work, so his wife answered the door. They chatted briefly, and the atmosphere was quite friendly. Just then, a delivery truck pulled up, and the driver unloaded a massive box, easily half the height of a person, for them to sign for. Jack's wife checked the name, saw it was indeed addressed to their household, and signed for it. After the courier left, the couple moved the box into the garage and opened it, only to discover a large commercial-grade coffee machine worth over $3,000. The problem was they hadn't ordered it. Even stranger, the address on the box was perfectly correct, and the name was right. It was addressed to Jack himself. The couple scoured their credit card statements, but found no charges. They checked their email, but found no order confirmation. Yet when they contacted customer service, they were told the order was genuine and had been fully paid for. Customer service also assured them that the purchase was made through the official website and there were no irregularities. Jack was completely bewildered when he got home that evening. His first thought was that his bank card had been compromised, but after a thorough check, the bank found no record of the transaction. The next day, they contacted the coffee machine company again, but the company insisted, "Payment has been received, the order is valid, and it cannot be canceled." The family was left utterly baffled. Just as they were trying to figure out who had actually placed the order, the doorbell rang. A young man in his 20s was standing at the door, looking sheepish. "Excuse me," he asked, "did a coffee machine of mine get delivered here?" Everyone was stunned. It turned out the young man had recently moved into a nearby apartment. When placing the order online, his browser had auto-filled an address he had searched for previously. He had once sent a package to Jack's house for a friend, so the system defaulted to that address, and he had clicked confirm without double-checking the details. The situation finally made sense. But just as they were getting ready to hand the machine over to him, something even more absurd happened. The young man couldn't budget. The machine was incredibly heavy, over 400 pounds, and even 3 people struggled to push it. They ended up calling a neighbor who had been drinking to help out. It took 4 adults nearly an hour of struggling just to load the machine onto the bed of a pickup truck. But the truck hadn't even driven 50 meters before a rear tire blew out. The reason was simple: it was overloaded. They had no choice but to unload the machine and call a tow truck. When the tow truck arrived, the driver took one look at the coffee machine and asked, "Are you guys planning to open a coffee shop?" Everyone was left between laughter and tears. Even funnier, the whole ordeal was filmed by an elderly lady next door who posted it to the neighborhood group chat with the caption, "Police yesterday, a tow truck today, are they opening a Starbucks tomorrow?" Within a day, the video had racked up over 100,000 views. Neighbors flooded the comments, "So this is the house. I walk my dog past here every day. Now I finally know why police cars are always on this street." Jack later told me that ever since that incident, people have been showing up at his house to take photos for no apparent reason. Some people mistook the place for a trendy social media hotspot. Tourists would even stop specifically to take selfies. To avoid the hassle, he simply stuck a sign in the lawn that read, "No free coffee here. No drunks either. Please move along." Unexpectedly, the sign itself went viral. People posted photos on social media, and locals chimed in, asking, What on earth happened? Someone eventually wrote a long post detailing the whole saga, from the drunkard mistaking the house for his own and the coffee machine being delivered to the wrong address, to the pickup truck suffering a flat tire. In just a few days, this ordinary little house had become a legendary spot in the neighborhood. But the story didn't end there. About a month later, Jack received a letter from the city government. He opened it expecting a fine for some violation, only to find an invitation to the annual community gathering, where they hoped he would share insights on building friendly neighborhood relationships. Jack nearly burst out laughing when he read it. He remarked, if drunks, police officers, coffee machines, flat tires, and tow trucks count as part of friendly neighborhood relations, then our family certainly has plenty of experience. He actually attended the event. The host asked with a straight face, "What do you think is most important for maintaining good neighborly relations?" Jack paused for a moment before answering. "First, if you've been drinking, make sure you remember your home address. Second, double-check the delivery address before placing an order. And finally, if you're buying a coffee machine that weighs over 400 pounds, make sure you have a sturdy enough vehicle ready." The entire audience roared with laughter. After the event, the community even presented him with a Best Neighbor commemorative plaque. Jack hung the plaque in a prominent spot in his living room. Whenever guests visited, they couldn't help but ask, "How did you get that award?" And so, he would have to tell the whole story all over again, starting with the drunkard who mistook the house for his own. To this day, there's a popular saying in the neighborhood, if you move here, the first thing you should do isn't getting to know the neighbors, it's memorizing your own address. Whenever people hear the story for the first time, they find it hard to believe. It sounds like something straight out of a TV drama. But that's life. Sometimes the most absurd and hilarious storylines aren't found in movies, but in the real, everyday lives of ordinary people. It was precisely because of these unexpected mix-ups that neighbors who were once strangers ended up becoming the best of friends. Now, every weekend, Jack hosts a barbecue in his backyard. The neighbor who once drunkenly mistook the house for his own handles the grilling, while the young man who had originally gone to the wrong address takes charge of the coffee. Whenever they raise their glasses, they laugh and say, "Thank goodness for that mix-up back then, otherwise, we wouldn't have all these stories to tell." This is a story set in an American middle school, one tinged with a touch of the absurd and that unique blend of earnestness and eccentricity characteristic of adolescence. The protagonist is Emily, a 13-year-old living in a typical middle-class neighborhood in Arizona. Her life is ordinary, riding the school bus, attending 8th grade classes, eating pizza slices for lunch, scrolling through her phone after school, doing homework, and secretly chatting with friends at night. Yet, one thing made her the talk of the school all semester. She developed a crush on a boy named Jason. Jason was the quintessential popular guy on campus. He played football, had a confident smile, and was constantly greeted by others in the hallways. But what really caught Emily's attention wasn't any of that. It was a small, seemingly insignificant moment. One day in science class, she accidentally spilled her lab notes, scattering papers all over the floor. While everyone else laughed, Jason knelt down to help her pick them up one by one and said, You actually did a great job on that experiment. The steps were just a bit jumbled." That single sentence stayed with Emily for the entire semester. From then on, she entered a classic adolescent crush mode, arriving at school 10 minutes early just for a chance encounter in the hallway, deliberately choosing a lunch seat with a view of him, and even strategically adjusting her class schedule, like signing up for the same PE class simply to watch him play sports. But a problem soon arose. Jason wasn't the kind of guy whose story revolved around just one girl. He was nice to everyone. He would help others pick up dropped books, chat with various girls, and even hand out water to all his teammates after football practice. Emily found herself grappling with a classic dilemma for American middle schoolers. Was he being extra nice to me, or was he just nice to everyone? To an adult, the answer might seem simple, but in the world of a 13-year-old, such questions have the power to upend the laws of the universe. The turning point came during an event preparing for the school's autumn dance. The school required every student to write an anonymous thank you note and drop it into a kindness box, after which teachers would randomly distribute them to others. Emily spent 2 evenings writing her note. She left it and signed, writing only a single understated sentence. "Thank you for helping me pick up those papers the other day. You might not realize it, but that meant a lot to me." After dropping the note in the box, she spent 3 full days in a state of mixed anticipation and regret, hoping he would see it, yet regretting that she had made it too obvious. On the 4th day, it happened. At lunchtime, Jason suddenly walked up to her table holding a piece of paper and said, "I think you wrote this." Emily's mind went completely blank. "Why?" she asked. Jason replied, "Because you're the only one who would refer to papers so formally." The reason sounded absurd, yet strangely logical. Emily neither admitted nor denied it. She simply looked down and ate her fries. But from that day on, a strange, semi-transparent dynamic emerged between them. They weren't a couple, yet they weren't exactly strangers either. They began to hold each other's gaze a second longer in the hallway, pause a beat longer in conversation, and add an extra emoji to their text messages. Then came the day of the dance. A week before the dance, a bizarre trend swept through the school. Someone created a post on an anonymous social platform titled, "Which pair at our school is most likely to become a prom couple?" Jason and Emily were the top picks. The buzz spread rapidly. Even the athletes started teasing them about it. For the first time, Emily realized that liking someone could turn into a public spectacle. She began to panic. In American high school culture, once a relationship is publicly defined, it loses its original purity and transforms into a mere social label. What made it even more awkward was that Jason seemed to be getting swept up in it too. His friends started asking, "Are you going to ask her to the dance?" Some even went so far as to script his lines for him. And so, the whole situation turned into a narrative driven by the collective will of the crowd. On the night of the prom, Emily wore a light blue dress her mother had helped pick out. She stood at the gym entrance, her heart pounding as if she were about to take a running test. Jason was late. When he finally appeared, all eyes were on the two of them. He walked up to Emily and, without any preamble, asked, "Do you want to dance the first dance with me?" The question made Emily feel like she was dreaming. But just as she was about to nod, something happened that defied the usual tropes of American teen dramas. Jason's phone rang. He glanced at it, his expression shifting into something complicated, and said, "Sorry, I might have to go take care of this." He turned and walked away, leaving Emily standing there alone. She didn't wait for him for the rest of the night. After the prom, things didn't play out like a movie. There was no misunderstanding cleared up, followed by a reconciling hug. Instead, reality set in. The next day, word got around school. Jason had left the prom halfway through to take a younger student, who had fallen and suffered a mild concussion, to the emergency room. This incident made Emily realize something complex. The Jason she liked wasn't just a character in a story meant only for her. He was a real person, someone who was kind to many people. And that's where the truly unexpected twist came in. A few days later, Emily received a reply to that anonymous thank you note, also via the kindness box. The note read, "I knew you were the one who wrote that letter, but I didn't call you out on it because I felt that would change the nature of it. Thank you for making that day more meaningful." There was no signature, but on the back of the paper, there was a tiny, simple sketch of a football. Emily asked around later, but no one admitted to writing the reply. Jason denied it too. So, the letter remained in her drawer, an existence that made perfect sense yet had no provable origin. Emily eventually came to understand something. In American high schools, the strangest kind of romance isn't the one where people don't end up together, but rather the many relationships that remain in a semi-real state, filled with interactions, emotions, and evidence, yet lacking a formal conclusion. Just like that letter, there is never an answer, yet it never disappears. This is a story set in a small town in Wisconsin, in the American Midwest, about a group of kids from ordinary families, a seemingly typical teenage romance, and an outlandish incident that ultimately left the entire community both amused and bewildered. The protagonist is Noah, a 14-year-old 8th grader. Quiet by nature, he was neither a star athlete nor the most outspoken student in class. His defining characteristic was his ordinariness, so ordinary, in fact, that teachers would often pause for a second during roll call just to confirm he actually existed. But that spring, he developed a crush on a girl in his class named Lily. Lily was the quintessential sunny girl found in American schools. She sang in the choir, loved to draw, got good grades, and could strike up a conversation with anyone. She didn't seek the spotlight, yet she possessed a presence that naturally drew people's attention. Noah first truly noticed her during art class. The teacher had asked everyone to draw their safe space. While most students sketched their bedrooms, the playground, or the beach, Lily drew an old school bus. Outside the windows, it was raining, but inside, the bus was bathed in a warm, golden glow. She explained, "I feel like being alone can be a safe place, too." That remark stayed with Noah for a long time. From then on, he entered a classic phase of low-key teenage pining. He wouldn't initiate conversation, but he would quietly choose the group she was in for class projects. He would deliberately slow his pace in the hallway, and at lunchtime, he would observe where she sat so he could casually pick a spot with a view of her. But a problem soon arose. Lily wasn't cold toward him, yet she didn't treat him any differently than anyone else. She was friendly to everyone. In an American middle school, this kind of friendliness without clear boundaries is a dangerous signal, as it can lead an ordinary boy to let his imagination run wild, conjuring up all sorts of romantic scenarios. The real turning point came during a school event called the Spring Social. It was a hybrid between a dance and a party where students could bring friends and drop anonymous notes into a confession box. After hesitating for 3 days, Noah finally wrote a note. "That school bus you drew looks great. It gives me a sense of safety." He didn't sign his name. He thought that would be the end of it. But the next day, something completely unexpected happened. During lunch, Lily suddenly walked over and asked, "You wrote that, didn't you?" Noah froze on the spot. "What?" he asked. "That note," Lily said. Noah neither admitted nor denied it. He simply looked down and poked at his sandwich. But from that moment on, a subtle shift occurred between them. They began making eye contact more often, though they would quickly look away each time. They started pausing a fraction of a second longer during conversations, and even during group activities. They would unconsciously find themselves standing on the same side. To adults, this state might be called undefined romantic tension, but in the world of middle schoolers, it was a relationship ripe for class-wide gossip. Things truly spiraled out of control because of a social media account. It wasn't an official school account, but an anonymous page created by students to post campus gossip and polls. One day, the account launched a poll. Which pair at our school is most likely to become a couple by the Spring Social? Noah and Lily were the top picks. Overnight, the news spread across the entire grade. People in the hallway started teasing them. "Are you two already dating? When are you making it official? Do we get wedding candy?" The real trouble was nothing had actually happened between them. This collectively defined relationship made Noah uncomfortable for the first time. He began deliberately avoiding Lily, and she seemed to sense the change. Strangely, however, she offered no explanation or clarification. She simply became a little quieter. Then came the day of the Spring Social. The event was held in the school gym. The lighting was warm, the music was loud, and the air was filled with the scent of soda and popcorn. Noah kept hesitating over whether to ask Lily for the first dance. He had rehearsed his opening line 3 times, but each attempt felt too silly. Just as he finally made up his mind to walk over, Lily spoke first. She said, "If you want to dance, you can just say so. There's no need to overthink it." Noah was stunned. Just as he was about to reply, something happened, something very realistic, yet something that completely disrupted the rhythm of a typical teen drama. The PA system crackled to life. A teacher's voice boomed over the microphone. "Has anyone seen the key to the infirmary? A younger student has fallen and needs the door opened." Without a moment's hesitation, Lily said, "I'll go help." And then she left. Noah was left standing alone by the edge of the dance floor. It was an awkward moment, but what made it even worse was that so many people in the room were watching him. It was as if everyone was waiting for the plot to unfold, only for reality to skip that entire episode. Later, everyone learned that Lily had gone to help a first-year student with a nosebleed. The infirmary had been locked, so she had to run around finding the teacher with the key, a whole ordeal that took quite a while. This incident made Noah realize something. The girl he liked wasn't the female lead of a scripted story, but someone who would walk right off the dance floor the moment someone else needed help. The story could have ended there on a note of personal growth. But the truly bizarre part happened a week later. The school was sorting through the replies from the anonymous confession box. A teacher was filing the letters by category when one was set aside because its content was peculiar. It was a reply to the anonymous note Noah had sent. The letter read, "I wrote it. I didn't say anything because I felt that once certain things are spoken aloud, they lose a bit of their authenticity." There was no signature. But in the corner of the stationery, there was a drawing of a school bus, a rainy day outside the window, and the lights on inside the bus. It was identical to the drawing Lily had made. Noah took the letter and asked her about it. After reading it, Lily simply said, "A lot of people probably think I wrote it, but I don't want to explain, because explaining would ruin it." Later, the incident became something of a semi-urban legend at the school. Some said Lily wrote it, others claimed a friend of hers did, some even suggested it was a prank by a teacher. But no one could prove it. A few years later, the class graduated and everyone went their separate ways. Noah later wrote a line in the yearbook. "It was only later that I realized the strangest thing about that spring wasn't liking someone. It was how we all tried to force an ending onto something that had no answer." As for that anonymous reply, no one ever came forward to claim it. It was like a familiar trope of youth in small-town America. Everyone played a part in the story, yet no one truly owned the ending. This is a true story set in the suburbs of Ohio, centering on a thoroughly ordinary family of three. Tom, the father, works for a logistics company. Linda, the mother, is a nurse at a local hospital, and their son, Ethan, is a 15-year-old high school student. The family's defining characteristic is that they are as normal gets. Their daily routine is practically a carbon copy from one day to the next, leaving the house at the same time, taking the same commute, shopping at the same supermarket on weekends, and watching the same evening news program. Yet, within this household that epitomized the standard American lifestyle, an event unfolded that struck the entire community as bizarre, and it all began with something seemingly mundane, a misdelivered letter. It happened in the autumn. The mail carrier stuffed the mail into the box as usual, but one letter clearly didn't belong to them. The envelope was addressed to Ethan M., yet their surname was Brown, and there was no one else in the neighborhood by that name. Linda initially intended to return it, but Ethan took the letter instead. "Maybe it was sent to the wrong house by mistake," he said. There was no return address on the envelope, only a scrawled, handwritten note. When Ethan opened it, he found just one sentence inside. "If you remember me, meet me behind the old oak tree at 4 o'clock on Friday." No signature. No explanation. Not even any context. For a 15-year-old, an age when any event might signal the start of a dramatic story, this letter instantly ignited his imagination. At first, Ethan thought it was a prank, But the problem was that he didn't know anyone who would write such a letter. He showed it to a friend, whose reaction was even more excited than his own. "Dude, this is obviously a hidden plot twist. You've got to go check it out." And so, things began to spiral out of control. Over the following week, Ethan's life underwent subtle changes. He started paying attention to everyone at school who might know him. There was Ava, the girl who sat behind him, usually quiet. She suddenly smiled at him in the hallway that week. Then there was a boy from his PE group who out of the blue asked, "Did you live in another state before moving here?" He began to wonder, was the letter writer someone from his school? Was there some sort of connection, a relationship he was unaware of, yet somehow involved in? Come Friday, he decided to go. The old oak tree was actually in the park behind the neighborhood. It was an ordinary tree leaning slightly, even with a rusty bench nearby. Ethan arrived 20 minutes early and waited until 4 o'clock. At 4 o'clock sharp, no one was there. At 4:10, still no one. He started to feel like he'd been played. Just as he was about to leave, a girl appeared. Her name was Megan. She was a student at a neighboring school and a year older than him. She looked a bit nervous, holding an identical letter. She was visibly startled when she saw Ethan and asked, "You got one too?" Ethan realized instantly, something wasn't right. They compared notes and discovered that both had received nearly identical letters, save for the names, one addressed to Ethan, the other to Megan, with the content being exactly the same. Even stranger, they didn't know each other at all. The question arose, who had sent the exact same invitation to meet to two teenagers who were complete strangers? The two began to investigate together. First, they checked their schools, but found no record of any connection between them. Then, they inquired at the post office. The staff said the letters had been sent via standard delivery, and there was nothing unusual about them. But the truly bizarre events began on the third day. Ethan started receiving a series of follow-up letters. The second letter read, "Have you met yet?" The third letter read, "If you have met, please don't tell anyone." The fourth letter was even more unsettling. "Your reactions are within the expected range." This no longer felt like an ordinary prank. It seemed more like some kind of observational experiment. Megan was receiving similar letters at the same time. The two began to feel frightened. So, they decided to take a bolder step, tracing the origin of the letters. They handed the envelopes to Linda, Ethan's mother. As a nurse, she was accustomed to procedural details and helped them contact a friend who worked in hospital administration. They uncovered a key detail. The postage originated from a specific regional post office, yet that post office had no corresponding record of the sender. In other words, the letters appeared to be automatically generated and delivered by a system, yet they lacked a genuine sender. Things began to take a bizarre turn. That was when Megan suddenly floated a bolder theory. Could someone be testing us? Ethan found the idea absurd, yet he couldn't explain the letters. Even stranger, similar incidents began cropping up throughout the neighborhood. For instance, the girl next door received a letter instructing her to linger in aisle 3 of the supermarket for 5 minutes. Another boy got a note telling him, "Don't take your usual route home today." There was no obvious connection between the letters, save for one common thread. They all involved minor interventions in daily routines. People in the neighborhood started calling the police. The police investigated but reached a peculiar conclusion. The letters had been sent legally. They contained no threats and offered no evidence of a crime. The case hit a dead end. But Ethan and Megan didn't stop there. They decided to run a counter-test. Following the instructions in the letters, they actually visited the designated locations on a specific day. They discovered something even stranger. Every person who had received an instruction happened to encounter a low-probability event that very day. One girl ran into the owner of a wallet she had lost years ago. A boy narrowly avoided a minor traffic accident. None of these events were major on their own, but taken together, they were unsettling. It was as if the letters weren't random pranks, but were instead optimizing for a specific outcome. Then, one day, Ethan received the final letter. Experiment concluded. Thank you for participating. No explanation, no signature. The next day, everything returned to normal. There were no irregularities at the post office. There were no further developments in the neighborhood. The letters vanished as if they had never existed. But Megan had kept one thing. The back of a letter she had secretly held onto bore a line of small print they hadn't noticed before. Subject profile, family stability grade A, adolescent decision-making behavior, medium high. The moment Ethan saw it, he realized this might not have been a romantic misunderstanding or a prank, but rather a large-scale test of social behavior. Yet the most absurd part was this: no one could prove it had ever happened. Years later, while attending university, Ethan would occasionally return to that small town. Whenever he passed that old oak tree, he found that no one ever spoke of the incident anymore. Yet he still remembers the feeling amidst the seemingly ordinary routine of American life. There was a time when everyone's choices appeared to have been given a gentle nudge, all without them even knowing who was watching from the shadows. And the strangest part of all is this: to this day, no one has ever admitted to sending that initial letter. This is a story set in an ordinary suburban neighborhood near Seattle, Washington, centering on a quintessential American family. Daniel, the father, works in system maintenance at a tech company. Sarah, the mother, holds an administrative job at a local school, and their 17-year-old son, Benjamin, Ben, is in high school. Their lives are defined by routine, quiet, and a lack of major drama. They live in a community governed by a strict homeowners association, HOA, where houses are tidy, lawns are uniformly manicured, and mailbox colors must meet specific regulations. Every month, they receive a newsletter reminding them of rules like keeping grass under 3 inches tall, putting trash cans out only after 7 p.m. on Tuesdays, and removing Christmas lights by January. They had grown accustomed to this orderly, tranquil existence for years, until the day Daniel downloaded NeighborSync, a seemingly harmless neighborhood app. Initially, the app's functions were mundane: posting community announcements, facilitating neighborly help, and sharing information about lost items or missing pets. However, after using it for a few days, Daniel noticed it began offering proactive alerts regarding matters that were deeply personal, even if not overtly dangerous. For instance, one morning it suggested, "Leave 7 minutes early today. There will be a slight delay on your route at 8:12. At first, he assumed it was simply an algorithm-driven recommendation based on weather and traffic data. Yet, Strangely, the predictions were accurate almost every time, precise down to the exact duration of waits at traffic lights. Gradually, the app became increasingly proactive. One day, it warned Sarah, "You might forget the food in the oven this afternoon. Please set a reminder," and that very afternoon, she indeed nearly left a roast chicken in the oven. Later, it even began to influence Benjamin's life, prompting him with alerts like, "Your math test tomorrow." The key topics for the exam were chapters 3 and 7, and the actual exam content the next day matched this tip almost perfectly. At first, the whole family assumed this was an upgrade to some AI recommendation system, a new smart service introduced by the community. But as time went on, the app began issuing stranger community behavior suggestions, such as prompting neighbors that today is a good day for a brief chat with the family at house number 142, or we suggest not turning on your backyard lights at 8 p.m. this Friday. It even published a community mood index akin to a weather forecast. Overall friendliness is low this week. Please avoid controversial topics. Daniel began to feel uneasy and went to the HA office to inquire, only to be told that they had no official app and had not authorized any third-party system to collect data on community behavior. This revelation made him realize the gravity of the situation for the first time. The app not only existed, but was being used by almost the entire neighborhood. Neighbors even started citing its suggestions in conversation, discussing whose lawn needed mowing or which household should host a barbecue, and children would even say things like, "The system says today is a good day for us to play basketball together." But the most bizarre incident occurred one Thursday night when the app suddenly pushed a notification. All residents are requested to stay indoors between 9:03 p.m. and 9:17 p.m. and avoid looking out the window. Daniel's first reaction was to dismiss it as a prank, but almost simultaneously, the community's public address system also began to broadcast. A notification appeared, and even the streetlights dimmed precisely at 9:03. The entire neighborhood fell silent, as if taken over by a unified program. Benjamin peeked out through the curtains and saw the red indicator lights of every smart doorbell camera on the street flashing in unison, as if recording something. Then a dozen or so autonomous delivery vehicles rolled slowly down the street, stopping at every doorstep to drop off a small box before moving on. No one stepped out, and there was no explanation. The next morning, every resident received one of those boxes. Inside was nothing but a card reading, "Community Synchronization Test Phase, 87% complete." There was no signature, no company logo, only a QR code. When Daniel tried to uninstall the app, his phone displayed a message, "Cannot remove system core component." He realized then that this so-called community app was likely far more than just software. It was a system embedded into the very infrastructure of neighborhood life. Even stranger, from that day on, relations between neighbors became unnaturally harmonious. There were almost no arguments or complaints, and even HOA fines dropped, as everyone seemed to perform the exactly right action at the exactly right time, as if the entire community had been recalibrated by some invisible set of rules. Yet, Daniel's family grew increasingly uneasy, realizing they had lost all sense of randomness. Their daily lives had become too precise. They would always encounter a green light at the intersection whenever they stepped out. At the supermarket, they always found the shortest checkout line. Even the TV news would coincidentally air the very programs they wanted to watch whenever they changed channels. One day, Benjamin couldn't help but ask, if everything is optimized, are the choices we make truly our own? No one answered that question until the early hours of a weekend morning, when the app suddenly popped up a final notification. Testing complete. Randomness will be gradually restored to the community. By the next day, the system had vanished completely. NeighborSync uninstalled itself from every phone, and even the App Store records were wiped clean. The HOA office denied that any digital system had ever existed. Neighbors reverted to their usual state of disarray. Some forgot to take out the trash, others squabbled over parking spots, and complaints about lawn height resumed, as if that previous, perfect order had been nothing more than a collective hallucination. Yet, while clearing out his old equipment, Daniel discovered an inexplicable log file in the router's backend. The final line read, "User has accepted the mild life intervention model. Satisfaction increased to 92.4%. At the very end of the file was a simple tag, "Next phase, household-level behavioral prediction model." He shut down his computer and gazed out the window at the neighborhood streets, now slightly chaotic, yet real. For the first time, he realized that perhaps the truly strange thing wasn't the system itself, but the fact that when life is optimized to perfection, people begin to question the very definition of normal. This story takes place in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado, and centers on Kevin, a thoroughly ordinary, perhaps even boring, 38-year-old man who works as a scheduling coordinator for a repair service chain. His life can be summed up in a single phrase, so stable it was virtually unchanging. He woke up at 6:50 a.m. and left the house at 7:15 a.m. every day, buying a medium Americano from the same coffee shop, never altering even the amount of ice. He lived in a quintessential American suburban neighborhood, a standard house with beige siding and a small front lawn, where neighbors were polite and reserved, exchanging the occasional nod or smile, but rarely engaging in deep conversation. The story truly begins when, one morning, he finds a coupon from a stranger in his mailbox. It was a supermarket discount voucher bearing his name, yet it came from a store he had never subscribed to or held a membership card for. Even stranger, the coupon read, "Exclusively for Mr. Kevin. Buy one banana today and get the second one free." At first, he dismissed it as junk mail that had slipped in with his regular letters, but the next day at the same time, he received another one. This time, it was a coffee discount. "Your standard order has been automatically matched." It even specified the exact brand he drank daily. Kevin began to feel uneasy. He checked with the post office, which reported nothing unusual, and then the supermarket, which claimed they offered no such personalized paper mail service. However, things took a truly bizarre turn on the third day, when the coupons began predicting his actions. Messages included things like, "You will open your refrigerator at 10:32 a.m. today. We suggest restocking your milk beforehand, and you might want to watch TV until 11:07 p.m. tonight. We've recommended a snack to tide you over." Initially, Kevin suspected some form of intrusive big data advertising, but the problem was that every single prediction turned out to be correct, leading him to wonder if he was being watched. So, he bought a camera and installed it in the kitchen. The very next day, the camera feed captured a note that had been slipped through the door crack. It read, "Surveillance activity recorded. Your reaction matches expected anxiety level B." Kevin was deeply unsettled by this message. He began trying to alter his behavior to test the system, intentionally skipping coffee, leaving the house late, or even skipping breakfast. Strangely, however, every time he deviated from his routine, the coupons would automatically adjust their content the next day. For instance, if he skipped coffee, the coupon would read, "You did not consume caffeine yesterday. An emotional compensation plan has been prepared for you. A free donut." Even his gym visits were predicted and rewarded. Gradually, He realized these coupons weren't merely advertisements, but a sort of lifestyle feedback system guiding his every choice. The eeriest part, however, was that he seemed to be the only one in the entire neighborhood receiving them. Finally, unable to hold back any longer, he showed the coupons to a neighbor who looked completely baffled and said, "We've never received anything like that." That very evening, he received an unprecedented upgrade notification coupon. It read, "Subject ID K17, behavioral stability has reached the intervention threshold. Do you accept the community optimization upgrade test?" Below were two options. A. Accept optimized life path. B. Maintain current random mode. May result in increased prediction error. Kevin barely slept that night. He began to seriously wonder if he had become a test subject in some experiment. Even more bizarrely, the moment he hesitated, the coupons began to take on an emotional tone. When he was in a bad mood, a prompt would appear suggesting he reduce social pressure when he worked overtime. It would warn, "You need to rest," or "the system will automatically adjust your work efficiency rating." One day, when he was running late, the office printer automatically spat out a slip of paper. "You were 4 minutes and 12 seconds late today. A rationalization has been sent to your supervisor on your behalf." Kevin finally snapped. Deciding to trace the source by working backward through the system's logic, he began monitoring the delivery times. He discovered that every delivery occurred at exactly 3:33 a.m. During a stakeout in the early hours, he finally spotted an ordinary white van, unmarked and logo-free, pulling up to his home. A figure in a hoodie stepped out, deposited a stack of papers into the mailbox, and left without a word. Summoning his courage, Kevin followed the van. It led him to a place he had never noticed before, an old building behind the neighborhood that looked like an abandoned courier sorting center, yet was brightly lit inside. Upon sneaking in, he discovered that the place was far from the sinister, conspiratorial organization one might imagine. Instead, it was filled with utterly ordinary people, middle-aged men in plaid shirts, college students chugging energy drinks, and an elderly woman eating a sandwich. They were engaged in an absurd task, manually sorting through cases of failed life predictions. The walls were plastered with lists of residents, and Kevin's name was circled within a red zone. One of them remarked, "Subject K17 is reacting in ways more complex than anticipated." He started observing the system in reverse. Kevin froze on the spot. Before he could flee, he was ushered into a conference room. There, they calmly revealed an even more preposterous truth. They weren't surveilling him, but rather testing the extent of human reliance on harmless predictive interventions. In short, the coupons, prediction alerts, and so-called optimization suggestions were part of a community behavioral study designed to see if ordinary people would lose their sense of autonomy while living a gently guided life. Kevin was their most successful, yet most volatile, subject, as he simultaneously accepted the predictions and attempted to rebel against them, a dynamic that prevented the model from. Kevin found the whole thing absurd. He asked, "So, what exactly do you want from me?" They replied, "We want you to be like everyone else, either completely ignore the system or rely on it entirely. But you're stuck in a middle ground, which is the hardest scenario to manage." Kevin laughed in disbelief right then and there. "So, just to study this, you let coffee, bananas, and donuts dictate my daily life?" They nodded seriously. Essentially, yes, but it was all positive reinforcement. Kevin fell silent for a long time before asking the crucial question, "What if I refuse right now?" The room went quiet for a moment. Checking their records, they said, then we'll stop sending you any predictions." Kevin breathed a sigh of relief, feeling finally free until they added, "However, historical data shows that about 83% of people voluntarily return to a state of unstable anxiety after losing the predictions." Kevin said nothing more. He went home and burned all his coupons. Sure enough, the next morning, nothing happened, no letters, no alerts, no suggestions. He enjoyed 3 full days of freedom, but by the 4th day, he began to struggle. He didn't know when to drink coffee or when to leave the house, and even deciding what to have for lunch became difficult. For the first time, he realized an absurd truth. The things that had controlled him had actually become part of his life's rhythm. The truly strange thing wasn't the system's existence, but the fact that he actually started to miss it. In the end, he stood in his kitchen holding a blank sheet of paper. After hesitating for a long while, he wrote, "Tomorrow morning at 7:15, remind me to buy coffee." He froze after writing it, then smiled and stuck the paper to the refrigerator. The white van outside the window never appeared again, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that some lives aren't controlled by outside forces, rather, people unknowingly choose to be predicted. This is a story set in an ordinary suburban neighborhood in Orlando, Florida. The protagonist, Brian, a 42-year-old dispatcher for a warehousing and logistics company, led a highly regimented life, up at 6:45 a.m., out the door by 7:10 a.m., a stop at the same coffee chain for a large iced coffee, and a commute along the same highway to work. Evenings at home were spent scrolling through his phone, watching the news, and occasionally mowing the lawn, only to trim it again on weekends after a reminder from the HOA that the grass was 0.3 inches over the limit. His life was so stable it was virtually devoid of surprises, until the day he received a package that wasn't meant for him. Although it bore his address, the recipient was listed as J. Anderson. He initially intended to return it, but a strange note on the package caught his eye. Before opening, "Please confirm if you are ready to receive a neighbor's life." Dismissing it as a marketing gimmick, Brian casually opened the box. Inside, he found not a commercial product, but a device resembling a smart speaker, accompanied by a note that read, "NeighborLink. Beta test device. Automatically linked to your community ID, A14. Thinking it was a delivery error, he set it aside, but that evening the device powered on by itself and spoke in a gentle, soothing voice. "Hello, Brian. Your commute today took 3 minutes longer than average. Would you like some optimization suggestions?" Startled, he unplugged it, but the next morning the device was active again, and not only was it back, but it had gained a new feature. It began broadcasting neighbor status updates. For instance, it might say, "The household to your left has a low mood index today. Please avoid making noise." Brian found this absurd and called the community management office, only to be told that they hadn't distributed any such devices and that no NeighborLink system existed. The problem, however, was that he wasn't the only recipient. He soon discovered that nearly every household on the block had received a similar device. They varied in appearance. Some were standalone speakers, others were small wall plug screens, and some were integrated directly into smart doorbells. Initially, everyone dismissed them as a new form of advertising or a prank, but a week later, things began to spiral out of control. The devices started coordinating community behavior, prompting residents to synchronize their trash bin placement times or warning a household against having a barbecue because wind direction would negatively impact the experience of 3 neighboring homes. They would even automatically announce recommended quiet hours for the community each morning. Strangely, although the neighbors were resistant at first, they gradually began to comply, because whenever they ignored the suggestions, they would encounter a series of highly coincidental mishaps, such as whenever a party was planned, it would suddenly rain, the sound system would break down, or the police would happen to patrol by. Over time, people began to suspect that the devices were some sort of community luck control system. Brian was initially dead set against it. He even tried wrapping the device in tinfoil, disconnecting the internet, and resetting the router, but the device remained completely unaffected. Moreover, every time he tried to rebel, the system would provide feedback, messages like user behavior detected deviating from recommendations, logged as a low compliance sample. Most bizarrely, the device began pushing neighborhood interaction tasks, such as, "We suggest you have a 3-minute unstructured conversation with the household at number 214 today." Brian ignored it at first, but that evening, the neighbor from number 214 actually knocked on his door, saying, "The system says we have to chat for 3 minutes, or it'll affect the community's weekly score." After awkwardly standing in the doorway and chatting about the weather for 3 minutes, the neighbor actually remarked in all seriousness, "I feel a bit more at ease." Brian began to realize that the system was altering interpersonal behavior across the entire community. Even stranger, community conflicts, complaints, and even HOA fines dropped significantly, as everyone was reminded in advance to avoid violations. Yet, the cost was that everyone began relying on the system to judge the correctness of their own actions. Then, one day, the system suddenly issued a major update notice, announcing the start of a group behavior synchronization test phase, requiring all residents to maintain a uniform indoor lighting brightness between 8 p.m. and 8:15 p.m. on Saturday, and to refrain from any outdoor activities. Brian thought the activity was nonsense and decided to deliberately act in defiance of it. That evening, he not only turned on his backyard lights and played music, but even invited friends over for a barbecue. Then, strange things began to happen. The light bulbs dimmed on their own, the music volume dropped, and the heat on the barbecue grill inexplicably lowered. Meanwhile, the neighbors, without directly intervening, stood by their windows watching him. There was no anger on their faces, only an expression suggesting he was an experimental anomaly. This unsettled him for the first time, making him feel as though the entire community was observing him rather than participating alongside him. The next day, the system provided feedback. Anomalous individual behavior detected in Zone A14, though overall synchronization rates remain unaffected, followed by a supplementary note. Recommend gentle behavioral guidance for user Brian. From then on, his life saw an increase in micro-interventions. The coffee shop would have his order ready in advance. He would hit every green light on his commute, and he would always end up in the fastest checkout line at the supermarket. While everything seemed convenient, Brian grew increasingly uncomfortable as he realized his choices were dwindling. He even tried altering his routine, such as going for a walk in the dead of night, only to find streetlights brightening automatically and vehicles yielding to him at intersections, as if the system were ensuring his path was smooth, no matter what. Finally, at 3 o'clock one morning, he discovered that every light in his neighbors' homes had turned on simultaneously, and all their doorbell cameras were flashing red dots. The system then announced, "Entering final evaluation phase. Individual resistance to intervention test," and a fleet of autonomous delivery vehicles began appearing throughout the neighborhood. It would slowly come to a halt in front of every house, deposit an identical small box, and drive away. The next day, everyone received an explanatory card reading. NeighborLink Community Behavior Optimization Test 92.7% complete. Thank you for your participation. No one knew what the project was, there were no company logos, and the HA denied the existence of any such system, yet strangely, from that day on, the system vanished entirely. All the devices reverted to factory settings and wouldn't even boot up. The community returned to its former, slightly chaotic state. People went back to littering, throwing late-night parties, and squabbling over lawn heights. Everything was normal again, yet Brian found himself unable to adjust. He began to miss that life of being prompted because back then, at least, he hadn't needed to agonize over so many choices. Even more absurdly, while sorting through old belongings one day, he discovered a line of tiny text hidden in the base of the device. Users take an average of 14 days to re-establish their life rhythm after losing the system. He stared at the words for a long time, finally smiled, and tossed the device into a drawer. Outside the window, neighbors were arguing again, this time over a misplaced trash can, their voices real, chaotic, and utterly unoptimized. Yet, he no longer found it strange. He had suddenly realized that the most bizarre aspect of life in American suburbia wasn't being controlled by a system, but rather the way people constantly oscillated between freedom and order, and how every seemingly normal day might actually be just another version of an experiment, only this time, there was no one left to tell you how to live. This is a story set in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. The protagonist, Jordan, is a 29-year-old who works the front desk and handles membership management at a chain gym. His life is so simple it could almost be described as predictable. He wakes up at 7 a.m., leaves the house at 7:45, and arrives at the gym by 8:30, where he habitually drinks a protein shake of a specific brand. After get off work, he goes home to play video games or scroll through videos, occasionally restocking groceries on weekends. He lives in a quintessential American residential neighborhood, quiet streets, tidy houses, and neighbors who exchange polite nods but never get close. Everything is carefully maintained to ensure no one intrudes on anyone else's space. That is, until the day he finds a membership card in his gym locker that doesn't belong to any known member. The card bears his name, but the membership number is 000, a number that doesn't exist in the gym's system. Thinking it was a printing error, he casually tosses it into the lost and found bin. Yet, the very next day, the same card reappears in his locker. This time, there is a line of text on the back. Welcome back to your basic training cycle. Jordan begins to sense something is amiss. He checks the system records and discovers a Jordan member profile in the back end, registered 3 years ago, even though he has only worked at the gym for a year and a half. Stranger still, the account's activity log is incredibly detailed, tracking everything from the time he drinks his protein shake and his treadmill speeds to even the peak times of his emotional fluctuations. Jordan begins to suspect. Wondering if the system had been hacked, he went to see the manager, only to be told that account has always existed. It's an automatically generated employee observation profile. Jordan was even more baffled, as he had never consented to any such observation. Yet, it didn't stop there. From that day on, he received a daily training suggestion, things like, "Today, we recommend reducing social interaction by 15% and doing 3 minutes of elevated heart rate training," or, "Your stress levels spiked at 1742. We suggest a brief cold water stimulus." At first, he assumed it was some kind of cross-promotion from a fitness app, but the problem was that the suggestions were uncannily precise. One day, for instance, he actually did feel agitated at 17:42 due to a client complaint. On another occasion, just as he was about to get into an argument with a colleague, a notification popped up, suggesting pausing the conversation, and, inexplicably, he actually stopped. It made him wonder if he was being controlled by some sort of behavioral system. The truly bizarre twist came on a Thursday evening, after his shift, as he was preparing to lock up and leave. He discovered a sheet of white paper taped to every mirror in the gym. It read, "Phase test. Subject has entered the stage of self-awareness." Jordan froze. He looked around. The gym was empty, yet every treadmill began to start up slowly at the same time. The lighting shifted from standard white to a soft, cool blue-white, resembling an experimental mode. Just as he was about to call the police, a locker suddenly sprang open on its own, revealing a complete dossier titled, "Regional Behavioral Optimization Experiment Log, Subject J29. The file contained a detailed record of his life data model from the past year and a half, even including predictions of 3 potential emotional trajectories he might experience over the next 3 days. For the first time, Jordan felt a profound sense of unreality. Determined to trace the source, he checked the surveillance footage and discovered that, every night at 1:11 a.m., a figure in a gray hoodie would enter the gym. The person used no access card, turned on no lights, and touched no equipment. Instead, they would simply pause for a few seconds in front of various lockers before leaving. Jordan decided to lie in wait and finally spotted the individual on the 3rd night. Yet, when Jordan rushed out to confront them, the stranger didn't flee, simply saying calmly, "You discovered this 4 days later than predicted." Jordan demanded, "Who are you? What are you doing?" The stranger replied, "We aren't interfering with you. We are simply reducing the random noise in your life." They then led Jordan into the gym's basement, revealing a fully equipped behavioral simulation center. The walls were plastered with lists of residents. His own name was marked in a blue zone, labeled High Stability Sample. Maintenance requires only minimal intervention. Even more shocking was the discovery that he wasn't the only one. There were hundreds of similar sample IDs across the city. The stranger explained that this was a citywide life rhythm optimization project designed to alleviate daily decision fatigue and enhance overall life stability through subtle cues, with the gym serving merely as a testing interface. Jordan found the revelation almost impossible to accept. He asked, "So, were my daily choices actually being guided by you?" The reply came, "Not every choice, only the pivotal moments." Jordan began to reflect on the coincidences of the past year, how he always managed to dodge traffic jams, received alerts just before losing his temper, and was interrupted before making the wrong decision. He had always attributed it to luck, only to realize now it was likely an algorithm. Most absurdly, he found he wasn't entirely angry. Instead, he felt a strange sense of being looked after. Finally, the voice told him, "You can choose to opt out of the system." Jordan said without hesitation, "I want out." The voice simply nodded and said, "Very well, but once you leave, you'll have to readjust to a life governed by randomness." The next day, the system vanished. The gym returned to normal. No blue lights, no predictions, no membership card glitches, as if nothing had ever happened. Yet, Jordan soon struggled to adapt. For the first time, he was late for work. For the first time, a dispute with a client escalated. For the first time, he stood in a 20-minute supermarket queue. He began to realize that true freedom is actually chaotic. The ultimate irony, however, was that a week later, he found a new card in his locker reading, "Welcome back. This time, we've reduced the frequency of the prompts. He stared at the card for a long time, but instead of discarding it, he tucked it into his wallet. He had suddenly understood that in this world, the truly strange thing wasn't the existence of the system, but the human tendency to repeatedly choose the illusion of what feels more comfortable over the reality of the choice between chaos and control. This is a story set in the suburbs of Chicago, Illinois. The protagonist, Alan, a 35-year-old regional inspector for a supermarket chain, spends his days driving between stores to check inventory, inspect displays, and handle mundane operational issues. His life follows a rigid, linear routine: up at 6:30 a.m., out the door by 7 o'clock, listening to the same podcast during his commute, and eating a microwaved sandwich with a Diet Coke for lunch every day. Evenings at home are spent scrolling through his phone or watching old movies. He lives in a typical American suburb: quiet streets, neat houses, and neighbors who exchange nothing more than a nod while taking out the trash. Everything is so normal that it invites no second thought, until the day he receives an inventory anomaly report during a store visit. It bears his name, but the store number listed is a non-existent branch, number 00 null. Stranger still, the report contains no details about stock levels. Instead, it bears a single sentence: at 17:06 today, you will face an irrational choice. Alan's first instinct is to dismiss it as a system glitch, so he tosses the paper aside. Yet, at the exact same time the following day, he receives an identical report at a different store. This one reads, "You have started to notice us." Sensing something is amiss, Alan checks the system backend and discovers that all such reports originate from an automated module named OpsPredict Layer, yet no such module existed within the company's organizational structure. When he asked the IT department, they replied, "There is no such system. We don't have any predictive capabilities." The problem, however, was that the slips of paper kept appearing daily, becoming increasingly specific. For instance, the note on the third day read, "You will miss an important conversation in the parking lot today." Sure enough, that very day, he missed a client's complaint on site because he was busy taking a phone call. It began to feel like a life that had been pre-rehearsed. Alan tried to test the system by deliberately changing his routes and schedule, or even canceling store visits at the last minute. Yet, no matter what he did, the reports would adjust their content a day in advance, as if updating in real time to reflect his every choice. Most bizarrely, the notes started appearing in places they shouldn't: inside his car, at his front door, and even in a supermarket shopping cart. Then, one day, he discovered a whole stack of reports inside his refrigerator. The top one read, "Domestic environment now under observation." For the first time, Alan felt genuine unease. Suspecting he was being stalked, he installed security cameras. The next day, the footage revealed something strange. At 2:47 a.m., the kitchen light turned on by itself, though no one was visible. The refrigerator door slowly opened, and a hand placed a new report inside. The video then cut to a line of text: "Surveillance activity recorded. System entering adaptation mode." Completely bewildered, Alan decided to take time off to investigate the source of the reports himself. He traced the printed codes on the paper and discovered they all originated from the same internal print center. However, the center's address corresponded to a blank spot on the map with no record of any building. He drove there anyway and found an ordinary-looking old warehouse, though a small sign by the entrance read Regional Behavioral Coordination Office. Inside, he didn't find the sinister conspiracy hub he had imagined, but rather a group of utterly ordinary people, some drinking coffee, others working on spreadsheets, and some even eating sandwiches during their lunch break. They weren't surprised to see him enter. They simply remarked, "You're 2 days later than expected." Alan asked, "You guys, what exactly is going on?" The person led him into a conference room where the walls were plastered with city maps and numbered lists. Next to his name was the label Subject A114. The official explained that this was neither surveillance nor control, but a light intervention life prediction system. They used extremely low-frequency cues to minimize friction in daily decision-making, such as avoiding wrong turns, lowering accident risks, and optimizing work pacing, and those slips of paper were micro-cues. Alan found the concept absurd. "So, you're deciding when I should miss a phone call?" The official shook his head. "We're simply reducing the likelihood of you making a choice you might regret." Alan began to reflect on the notes. After every cue, he had indeed avoided trouble, traffic jams, arguments, even a minor equipment mishap. He suddenly realized that while these things made his life run more smoothly, they had also stripped away the element of chance. "What if I refuse?" he asked. "You can opt out," the official replied, adding, "but once you do, you'll revert to a completely random lifestyle, and your error rate will rise by 27%. Alan didn't answer immediately. He went home, piled all the notes onto his table, and stayed up all night. The next morning, he left the house as usual, but found no new notes. The system had truly stopped. He had expected to feel free, but reality soon began to bite back. For the first time, he was late. For the first time, he went to the wrong store location. For the first time, he got stuck in a massive highway traffic jam. He even began to wonder if he had lost some sort of invisible aid. A week later, he found one last remaining note in his car bearing a single sentence: "You are now in baseline life mode." He stared at the words for a long time, then smiled and tucked the note into the car's sun visor. He had finally understood that in the seemingly unfettered daily life of America, what people truly rely on isn't the rules themselves, but the tiny cues that make those rules just about acceptable. When those cues vanish, the ensuing chaos makes one realize that normal life had actually been quietly smoothed out all along by some invisible system. This is a story set in the suburbs of New Jersey. The protagonist, Mark, is a 40-year-old claims adjuster for an auto insurance company. His daily routine is monotonous and unchanging, turning on his computer, processing accident photos, verifying reports, and approving or rejecting claims. After get-off work, he drives home, stopping at the same gas station for coffee and a hot dog. Once home, he either watches a game or tends to his lawn. He lives in a typical HOA community where the houses are uniform in color and the lawns are manicured with ruler-like precision. Neighbors are polite yet distant, and life feels so stable that one never questions its nature until one morning. He receives a liability confirmation letter in his mailbox. Strangely, the letter isn't about a traffic accident. Instead, it reads, "A minor, unrecorded deviation occurred in your daily life today. Please confirm liability." Mark assumes it is an internal test document and takes it to the office, only to find no record of it in the system. Even stranger, he receives a similar document the next day, this time stating, "Your choice at 7:48 triggered alternative path A." Sensing something is amiss, he investigates the company's system and discovers a hidden module linked to his account labeled behavior adjustment, log, behavioral adjustment log. But this module belonged to no specific department and could not be disabled. From then on, he received these incident confirmation letters daily, yet their content grew increasingly absurd. Messages like, "You deviated from the standard path in your coffee selection. It has been automatically corrected to the recommended flavor," or "You chose a suboptimal parking spot. The system has recorded this to optimize future probability." Initially, he dismissed them as system glitches or pranks, but the issue was that these adjustments influenced his reality before he even acted. For instance, just as he considered changing his coffee order, the system would suggest sticking to his usual choice to reduce afternoon fatigue. Whenever he complied, life indeed ran more smoothly. Less traffic, better workflow, and even a mysterious drop in client complaints. Then, one day, he discovered a bizarre entry in the insurance claims system. A case of his had been closed in advance, with a closing date 3 days before the actual accident occurred. For the first time, Mark felt genuine unease. He began trying to deliberately create deviations, taking detours, stalling, or even submitting incorrect reports, but every deviation was gently corrected by the system. Once, when he intentionally ignored a suggested route, the navigation system suddenly recalculated a path that was identical yet smoother, as if the system were playing a game against him that he couldn't possibly win. The strangest twist came on a Friday night. While working late and preparing to leave, the printer suddenly whirred to life, churning out a stack of documents that read, "Regional Behavioral Stability Test, Phase 2, with his name marked as High Dependency User." Tracing the clues in the documents, he found that all the incident confirmation letters originated from a single internal server, one that didn't exist on the company's network architecture map. He took the next day off to track the IP address to its source, only to find it pointed to an ordinary neighborhood warehouse. There were no external markings, save for a small label on the door, "Regional Behavioral Coordination Point #NJ07. Upon entering, he didn't find a sci-fi secret base, but rather a mundane office. People drinking coffee, working on Excel spreadsheets, and eating sandwiches. They didn't even seem surprised when Mark walked in. They simply said, "You discovered this 2 weeks later than expected." Mark asked, "What exactly are you doing?" They led him into a room where the walls were plastered with city maps and resident ID numbers. Next to his name was the label Subject M09, sample with above-average stability. The person in charge explained that this wasn't about control, but rather a form of light intervention insurance modeling. By providing subtle cues and advance information, they reduced the likelihood of poor decisions and accidents in people's lives, essentially eliminating future minor troubles before they happened. Mark found the concept absurd. "So you're deciding for me when I make a mistake?" he asked. They shook their heads. "We simply prevent those mistakes from happening to you." Mark reflected on the past few months. Those suggestions had indeed spared him a lot of trouble, avoiding car crashes, client disputes, and erroneous insurance claims, but he had also lost the room for the unexpected. "What if I opt out?" he asked. The reply was calm. "You can withdraw, but the system will no longer correct your path." After a long silence, Mark chose to withdraw. The system stopped that very day, and everything returned to normal. No queues, no corrections, no preemptive resolutions. Life became chaotic again. He was late for the first time due to a wrong turn, scraped his car in a parking lot for the first time, and faced his first client complaint caused by a lapse in judgment. He thought he had finally returned to real life, but weeks later, he began to miss those reminders. Back then, at least, his life had been stable, unlike the current state of randomness, where anything could go wrong at any moment. One night, he found a final, lingering report in an old file box. It read, "User has returned to the baseline risk model. Accident probability restored to normal levels." He stared at the words for a long time, then smiled and put the document back in the drawer. He had suddenly realized that in a life like the one in America, seemingly free yet highly regimented, what people truly fear isn't being managed by a system, but losing that tiny order that keeps chaos under control. And when that order vanishes, one begins to wonder, was that past sense of safety merely luck, or was it some kind of unacknowledged arrangement all along? This is a story set in the suburbs of the Twin Cities, Minnesota. The protagonist, Jack, a 36-year-old dispatcher for a home repair chain, leads a life so standardized it borders on a boring model home existence. His routine is set in stone. The alarm goes off at 6:55 a.m., and he heads out at 7:20. He buys a large Americano from the same coffee shop, listens to the same podcast in the car, and passes the same 3 traffic lights on his commute. Even his lunch is practically always the same, a turkey sandwich and a bag of chips. He lives in a typical American HOA community where lawns must be kept at a uniform height and trash cans must all face the same way. Interactions with neighbors rarely go beyond a casual, "How's it?" and then they would go their separate ways, living lives so stable that no one would ever suspect a thing. That was until the day he received an unassigned work order in the system, ticket number 000, repeat. Instead of a repair task, the content was a single sentence, "You will receive a call from the future today." Jack's first reaction was to assume it was a system error. He closed the ticket, but 10 minutes later, his phone actually rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. When he answered, there was only silence, followed by a voice saying, "What you are hearing now is the day you first deviated from the recommended route." The call cut off immediately, leaving Jack stunned. He checked his call logs, but there was no trace of the call. He dismissed it as a prank, but things soon took an increasingly bizarre turn. The next day, he received another new ticket, "Avoid entering the convenience store at 14:32 today." He didn't believe it at first, but at 14:31, he happened to park right in front of the store. After hesitating for a second, he decided to go in. As soon as he pushed the door open, the store's PA system malfunctioned, and everyone looked up at him simultaneously. The cashier asked, "Are you the person mentioned in the system alert?" Jack was completely bewildered. He began to realize that these work orders seemed to be describing his actions in advance. Even more eerie was the fact that whenever he tried to do the opposite, he encountered perfectly plausible resistance, such as being called away by an urgent phone call, getting a flat tire, or facing a suddenly long queue, forcing him to return to the recommended path. At first, he thought it was some kind of big data prediction system, but the problem was that the prompts began to include emotional assessments, such as, "Your emotional volatility is high today. Avoid speaking to the neighbor at house number 118. Sure enough, that very day, he nearly got into an argument with the neighbor at number 118. Jack grew uneasy and tried to trace the source of the system, only to discover that all the work orders originated from a hidden module named Routing Future Layer, yet this module didn't exist anywhere in the company's organizational structure. When he asked the IT department, they replied, "We don't have a future prediction function." Yet, in reality, the system sent him future alerts daily. The most bizarre instance was a message reading, "At 17:06 today, you will decide whether to trust us." He happened to be standing by the office window at that exact moment. When the time arrived, a document automatically popped up on his computer titled User Choice Confirmation Agreement. It contained only 2 buttons, Accept Suggested Path and Reject Suggested Path. He didn't click either, but the system automatically logged the status as delayed choice. From then on, he noticed subtle changes in his life. Traffic lights turned green just as he approached, client calls came in right before he was about to return them, and he always ended up in the shortest supermarket checkout line. He began to suspect he was being optimized by some system. Then, late one night while working overtime, the printer suddenly whirred to life and spat out a full report stating, "Behavioral prediction accuracy for subject J36 has reached 97.8%, entering advanced observation phase." Jack traced the document's source to an old warehouse address. He drove there the next day and found no company signage, only a small plaque reading Zonal Temporal Behavioral Coordination Point. Pushing the door open, he didn't find a sci-fi base, but rather a group of ordinary-looking people, some in hoodies, others drinking coffee or fixing a printer, much like any standard office. They weren't surprised to see him. One even remarked, "You found this place 11 days later than expected." Jack asked, "What exactly are you doing here?" They led him into a conference room where the walls were covered in city maps and numbered lists. His name was marked as J36, High Responsiveness Prediction Sample. The person in charge explained that this wasn't about control or surveillance, but a temporal behavioral prediction system. By using low-intervention prompts, they adjusted key decision points in people's lives ahead of time to reduce the probability of future conflicts and accidents, essentially making life run more smoothly. Upon hearing this, Jack felt it seemed absurd. He asked, "So you decided in advance exactly when I'd walk into a convenience store?" The other party shook their head. "We simply narrowed down the choices you might otherwise regret." Jack began to reflect. Those prompts had indeed made his life run with uncanny smoothness. He never missed a client, never got stuck in bad traffic, and never made a mistake at work. Yet, he realized something else. He hadn't experienced a genuine surprise in ages. "What if I opt out of the system?" he asked. After a few seconds of silence, the reply came, "You can leave, but you'll revert to a completely random mode, and prediction errors will return." Jack hesitated all night, but ultimately chose to quit. The next day, the system vanished entirely. No work orders, no prompts, no calls from the future. Everything returned to normal. But soon, his life descended into chaos. He missed a call from a crucial client for the first time, missed a highway exit and took a half-hour detour, and faced his first complaint due to a lapse in judgment. He began to wonder if he had lost some sort of invisible aid. Weeks later, he found a final sheet of paper in an old file box bearing the message: "User has returned to the baseline temporal model. Future prediction function disabled." He stared at the words for a long time, then smiled faintly, folded the paper, and tucked it into his pocket. He had finally realized that in the seemingly free landscape of everyday American life, what people truly rely on isn't the prediction itself, but the illusion of knowing the outcome a little bit early, an illusion that makes chaos feel less terrifying. Only when that illusion vanishes do people understand that a normal life is, in fact, a constant oscillation between controllable chaos and being gently orchestrated.